Good day, friends, and welcome back to Conflicts of the Human Race. Today, I will tell you about the entire story of the Jewish-Roman Wars, 66-100 and 35 CE. Now buckle up as we begin. In the dusty streets of Caesarea Maritima, tension crackles like lightning before a storm. The year is 66 CE, and the Roman province of Judea stands on the precipice of rebellion. For decades, heavy taxation, religious oppression, and cultural insensitivity have pushed the Jewish population to their breaking point. The immediate spark comes from a dispute over synagogue rights in Caesarea, where Greeks and Jews clash violently. Roman procurator Gessius Florus, notorious for his corruption and cruelty, seizes 17 talents from the temple treasury, claiming it's for imperial taxes. This brazen act of sacrilege ignites fury throughout Jerusalem. Jewish protesters mock Florus by passing around a basket, collecting coins for the poor procurator. His response is swift and brutal, unleashing his soldiers upon the city. The streets of Jerusalem echo with screams as Roman soldiers rampage through the upper city. Florus orders his troops to plunder wealthy Jewish homes and crucifies any who dare resist, including women and children of Roman citizenship. The brutality shocks even hardened veterans. Jewish leaders plead for restraint, but their words fall on deaf ears. In the temple courts, priests and Pharisees debate whether this persecution justifies armed resistance against Rome's mighty legions. Young zealots sharpen their daggers in hidden chambers, while moderate voices urge patience and prayer. The high priest Ananus tries desperately to maintain peace, knowing that open rebellion means certain destruction. But in the narrow alleyways of the lower city, radical preachers inflame crowds with promises of divine deliverance. They speak of ancient prophecies, of God's chosen people rising against their oppressors. The die is cast when Eleazar ben Ananias, captain of the temple guard, makes a fateful decision that will change Jewish history forever. He orders the cessation of sacrifices for the Roman emperor. The cessation of imperial sacrifices reverberates through the empire like a declaration of war. In Rome, Emperor Nero receives the news with cold fury. No province has dared such blatant defiance since Gaul fell to Caesar. The ritual offerings for the emperor's health and prosperity were not mere ceremony but sacred bonds of allegiance. Their termination means only one thing: rebellion. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, the moderate aristocracy attempts reconciliation, sending envoys to Florus and even to Syria's governor, Cestius Gallus. But radical factions have already begun seizing strategic positions throughout the city. Menahem ben Judah, grandson of the famous rebel Judas of Galilee, storms the fortress of Masada with a band of Sicarii assassins. They massacre the Roman garrison and seize the armory, distributing weapons to any who will join their cause. The revolt spreads like wildfire through Judea's hills and valleys. In village synagogues, rabbis read from the books of Maccabees, reminding their congregations of ancient victories against foreign oppressors. The spirit of rebellion burns bright, but few comprehend the terrible price that awaits. Cestius Gallus, legate of Syria, marches south with the 12th Legion Fulminata and auxiliary forces, confident that a show of Roman steel will quickly crush this provincial uprising. His army numbers nearly 30,000 men, a force that has conquered nations and toppled kings. But as they advance through the Judean hills, they encounter fierce resistance at every turn. Jewish fighters, knowing every cave and mountain path, strike like phantoms before melting back into the landscape. The Romans, weighed down by heavy armor and siege equipment, struggle in the unfamiliar terrain. At Beit Horon, the same narrow pass where Judas Maccabeus once ambushed the Seleucids, history repeats itself with devastating effect. Jewish forces under Simon Bar Kokhba attack the Roman column from the heights, rolling boulders down onto the packed ranks below. Gallus watches in horror as his disciplined legionaries break formation, panic spreading through their ranks like plague. The mighty 12th Legion, veterans of campaigns in Armenia and Germania, flee in disarray, abandoning their sacred eagle standard to the rebels. This stunning victory electrifies the Jewish cause and sends shockwaves throughout the empire. News of Gallus's defeat reaches Emperor Nero as he performs on stage in Greece, and the artus tempora's face darkens with uncharacteristic rage. The humiliation of a Roman legion demands swift and terrible retribution. From the ranks of his most capable generals, Nero selects Titus Flavius Vespasianus, Vespasian, a grizzled veteran whose campaigns in Britain earned him legendary status. Vespasian arrives in Antioch with clear orders: crush the rebellion completely and restore Roman honor. He assembles a massive force including the 5th Macedonica, 10th Fretensis, and 15th Apollinaris legions, supported by auxiliary cohorts and allied troops. Meanwhile, the Jewish rebels struggle with internal divisions that threaten to tear their movement apart. In Jerusalem, competing factions battle for control even as Roman armies mass on their borders. The aristocratic moderates led by Ananus clash with radical zealots, while Sycoran assassins eliminate anyone they deem insufficiently committed to the cause. Simon Bar Giora controls the Judean countryside with his peasant army, while John of Gischala commands fierce loyalty in Galilee. These divisions will prove as deadly to the Jewish cause as any Roman sword. Vespasian's methodical campaign begins in Galilee, where the rebel commander Josephus ben Mattathiahu has fortified the hilltop city of Jotapata. The future historian Josephus believes his position impregnable, but he underestimates Roman engineering prowess. For 47 days, the siege drags on as legionaries construct massive earthworks and siege ramps under constant arrow fire. Josephus inspires his defenders with speeches about freedom and divine providence, while his engineers devise clever countermeasures against Roman siege engines. They pour boiling oil on attackers and use wet hides to extinguish fire arrows. But Roman persistence gradually tells. Vespasian's son Titus leads daring night assaults, while artillery pounds the city walls day and night. Finally, the Romans achieve a breakthrough. As legionaries pour through the breach, Josephus and 40 surviving defenders retreat to a hidden cistern. Trapped and facing certain death, they make a suicide pact, drawing lots to determine who will kill whom. But when only Josephus and one other remain, the future historian persuades his companion to surrender instead. This decision will change the course of the war's historical record forever. Brought before Vespasian in chains, Josephus makes a desperate gamble for his life. Drawing upon his knowledge of Jewish prophecy and Roman superstition, he declares that the general himself will become emperor, fulfilling ancient oracles. Vespasian, though skeptical, spares the captured commander's life, a decision that will preserve the most detailed account of this brutal war. As Josephus transitions from rebel leader to Roman advisor, Vespasian continues his systematic conquest of Galilee. City after city falls to his legions: Tarichaea, Gamala, and dozens of smaller settlements. The Roman war machine proves unstoppable, combining superior discipline, engineering, and logistics. Refugees flee south toward Jerusalem, carrying tales of Roman brutality and Jewish defeats. In the Holy City, factional fighting intensifies as moderates blame zealots for provoking this catastrophe. John of Gischala arrives from fallen Galilee with his surviving followers, adding another volatile element to Jerusalem's political chaos. The Idumeans, traditional allies of the Jews, split between supporting the rebellion and seeking accommodation with Rome. Throughout Judea, the countryside bleeds as Roman patrols hunt down rebel bands and punish any village suspected of supporting the insurgency. The year 68 CE brings dramatic changes to the Roman political landscape. Emperor Nero, facing rebellion and Senate opposition, commits suicide in his palace gardens. The empire plunges into civil war as rival generals, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, battle for the purple. Far from Rome, Vespasian receives urgent messages from his supporters urging him to claim the throne himself. His legions in Judea acclaim him emperor, and Egyptian forces quickly follow suit. But this development gives the Jewish rebels an unexpected reprieve. As Vespasian prepares to march on Rome, he leaves his son Titus in command of the Judean campaign. The young general, eager to prove himself worthy of his father's reputation, begins planning the ultimate prize: the conquest of Jerusalem itself. Inside the Holy City, three major factions continue their destructive infighting. John of Gishala controls the Temple Mount, while Simon Bar Giora dominates the upper city. The third faction, led by Eleazar ben Simon, holds the inner temple courts. These leaders burn each other's grain supplies and slaughter rivals, even as Roman armies approach their gates. The defenders' greatest enemy proves to be themselves. In the spring of 70 CE, Titus surrounds Jerusalem with 4 legions and auxiliary forces totaling over 60,000 men. The young general offers terms of surrender, but the divided Jewish leadership cannot agree on a response. Some moderates favor negotiation, while zealot factions denounce any compromise as betrayal of their sacred cause. The city's population has swollen to nearly 1 million, with refugees from throughout Judea, straining food supplies even before the siege begins. Titus orders construction of a circumvallation wall, sealing Jerusalem completely and condemning its inhabitants to slow starvation. Roman engineering creates an unbreachable barrier of stone and timber, studded with watchtowers and patrolled constantly. Inside the city, the 3 rival factions finally unite against the common threat, but their cooperation comes too late. The defenders fight with desperate courage, launching sorties against Roman positions and using every trick of siege warfare. They tunnel under enemy fortifications, rain arrows and stones from the walls, and even attempt to burn the Roman siege engines. But they cannot break the inexorable grip of Roman military science, tightening around their ancient stronghold. As weeks turn to months, famine grips Jerusalem with skeletal fingers. The wealthy auction precious jewels for handfuls of grain, while the poor gnaw leather and bark. Josephus, now serving as Titus's interpreter, calls out daily appeals for surrender from beneath the walls, earning curses and projectiles from his former comrades. Stories of cannibalism spread through the starving city as desperate parents make unthinkable choices. The historian records one mother who kills and cooks her own infant, offering half to her horrified neighbors. Roman soldiers peer over their siege works in amazement at the defenders' continued resistance despite such suffering. Bodies pile in the streets faster than the living can bury them, and disease spreads through the cramped quarters. Yet still the defenders fight on, driven by religious fervor and the knowledge that surrender means slavery or death. The temple sacrifices continue even as priests faint from hunger at the altar. Young zealots, faces gaunt with starvation, sharpen their daggers and speak of martyrdom. In the Roman camps, Titus grows impatient with the siege's duration, knowing that his reputation depends on swift victory. He orders intensified assaults against the city's defenses. The outer walls of Jerusalem finally crumble under relentless bombardment from Roman ballistae and catapults. Legionaries pour through the breaches like an iron tide, their gladi gleaming in the morning sun. Street fighting erupts throughout the lower city as Jewish defenders fall back toward the Temple Mount, contesting every building and alleyway. Roman discipline clashes with desperate Jewish courage in brutal house-to-house combat. The defenders use their knowledge of the city's maze-like streets to maximum advantage, ambushing Roman patrols and then vanishing into hidden passages. But superior numbers and equipment gradually tell. Titus establishes his headquarters in the conquered sections, from where he can observe the temple's golden walls and towering porticos. The remaining defenders retreat to their final stronghold, the sacred precinct that has stood for 5 centuries as the spiritual heart of Judaism. Here, surrounded by marble colonnades and courts where their ancestors worshipped, the last zealots prepare for their final stand. They know that defeat means not just death, but the destruction of everything they hold sacred. The temple treasury is emptied to forge weapons, and sacred vessels become defensive barriers. The siege of the Temple Mount becomes a battle for the soul of Judaism itself. Within the sacred courtyards, where Solomon once dedicated the first temple to God, zealot defenders prepare for martyrdom. They believe divine intervention will save them at the final moment, as it did when Assyrians besieged Jerusalem 7 centuries earlier. Roman siege engines roll closer to the temple walls, their crews protected by testudo formations of overlapping shields. The defenders rain down stones, arrows, and burning pitch, but Roman engineering inexorably advances. Titus, according to Josephus, orders his soldiers to spare the temple building itself, hoping to preserve this architectural marvel as a trophy of Roman victory. But in the chaos of assault, a legionary hurls a burning brand through a golden window. The flames spread rapidly through the cedar panels and silk hangings, creating an inferno that no human power can control. Jewish priests throw themselves into the flames rather than witness their sanctuary's destruction, while others leap from the walls to their death. The site of the burning temple can be seen for miles, a column of smoke rising toward heaven like the prayers of a dying nation. The destruction of the Second Temple marks the end of an era in Jewish history. As the sacred building collapses in ruins, Roman soldiers systematically loot everything of value, loading wagons with gold, silver, and precious artifacts. The temple treasures, accumulated over centuries of devotion, become spoils of war destined for Rome's triumph parade. Thousands of Jewish defenders lie dead in the courtyards where their ancestors once celebrated Passover and Yom Kippur. The survivors face a grim fate. The young and strong are reserved for the gladiatorial games, while others are sold into slavery throughout the empire. Titus orders the city's walls demolished and most buildings burned, leaving only ruins to mark where the holy city once stood. The psychological impact of this catastrophe reverberates throughout the Jewish world. In Alexandria, Babylon, and other diaspora communities, Jews weep and fast upon hearing the news. The temple's destruction seems to confirm the worst fears of those who opposed the rebellion. Without their central sanctuary, how can the Jewish people maintain their covenant with God? This question will reshape Judaism for millennia to come, as rabbis develop new forms of worship and study to replace the ancient sacrificial system. While Jerusalem burns, one final act of the drama remains to be played out in the Judean desert. The fortress of Masada, perched on its isolated plateau, still flies the banner of Jewish independence. Here, Eleazar ben Yair leads nearly 1,000 rebels, men, women, and children, in their defiant last stand against Rome. The Sicarii, who captured Masada at the rebellion's beginning, have been joined by refugees from Jerusalem's fall, creating a community determined to die free rather than live in chains. For 3 years after the temple's destruction, they maintain their precarious independence, raiding Roman supply lines and serving as a symbol of continued resistance. But Flavius Silva, the new Roman governor, decides to end this lingering embarrassment once and for all. He marches the 10th Legion to Masada's base and begins construction of an enormous siege ramp up the western slope. Thousands of Jewish prisoners and Roman soldiers labor under the desert sun, hauling stones and timber to create a pathway to the summit. The defenders watch helplessly as the impossible becomes inevitable. Roman engineering will breach their mountain stronghold, just as it conquered Jerusalem's mighty walls. As the Roman siege ramp nears completion, Eleazar ben Yair faces the most terrible decision in his people's history. On the fortress walls, he can see Roman siege engines being assembled, ready to breach Masada's defenses within days. The fate of captured rebels is well known: torture, crucifixion, or bloody death in the arena for the entertainment of Roman crowds. Gathering his followers in the synagogue they have built atop the mountain, Eleazar delivers 2 impassioned speeches that Josephus will later record. He reminds them of their oath to live as free men, and argues that death by their own hands is preferable to slavery under Roman whips. The debate continues through the night as families wrestle with an unthinkable choice. Some argue for surrender, hoping the Romans might show mercy to the children. Others speak of hidden caves where they might hide until the legions depart. But gradually, Eleazar's logic prevails. They have seen Jerusalem's fate and know what awaits them. The decision, when it comes, is almost unanimous. They will deny Rome its final victory by choosing death with dignity over life in chains. The preparations begin immediately as men sharpen their daggers for a purpose no warrior should contemplate. The mass suicide at Masada unfolds with methodical tragedy as 960 men, women, and children choose death over slavery. Each family patriarch kills his own wife and children, then joins 9 other men in a final lottery. The 10 chosen cast lots among themselves until only one remains, who must take his own life after ensuring all others are dead. The fortress falls silent, except for the desert wind whistling through empty chambers and abandoned courtyards. When Roman soldiers finally breach the walls at dawn, they find only corpses and 2 women with 5 children who had hidden in a cistern to witness and record their people's final act of defiance. The legionaries, hardened by decades of warfare, stand in stunned silence at this ultimate rejection of Roman authority. Even in death, the Jewish rebels have achieved a kind of victory, denying their enemies the satisfaction of conquest. Silva orders the fortress garrisoned, but soon abandons it as strategically worthless. The desert reclaims Masada, but the story of its defenders' courage will echo through history. For Jews facing persecution in future centuries, Masada becomes a symbol of resistance and the price of freedom. Never again, they vow, will their people face such desperate choices alone and abandoned. The First Jewish-Roman War ends with Judea transformed into a Roman wasteland, but the spirit of rebellion proves harder to extinguish than cities and temples. For 60 years, the Jewish diaspora endures Roman oppression while dreaming of return to their homeland. The temple tax once sent to Jerusalem now flows to Rome's treasury, a constant humiliation that fuels resentment throughout the Mediterranean world. In Babylon, Egypt, and other Jewish communities, schools preserve Hebrew learning and maintain hope for eventual restoration. The new Emperor Trajan launches ambitious campaigns in Dacia and Mesopotamia, stretching Roman military resources thin. This presents an opportunity that Jewish leaders cannot ignore. In 115 CE, rebellion erupts simultaneously across multiple provinces: Cyrenaica, Egypt, Cyprus, and Mesopotamia. The Quito's War, named after the Roman general Lucius Quietus, who eventually suppresses it, proves almost as devastating as the earlier conflict. Jewish communities that had survived for centuries are virtually exterminated. In Cyprus, the violence is so severe that Jews are permanently banned from the island. The cycle of rebellion and repression continues, each uprising more desperate than the last. In Judea itself, Roman colonies replaced Jewish towns, but in hidden caves and mountain retreats, the dream of independence survives. In 132 CE, a new Jewish leader emerges from the caves and ruins of Judea. Shimon Bar Kokhba, later known as Bar Kokhba, or Son of a Star, claims to be the long-awaited Messiah who will restore David's kingdom. The great Rabbi Akiva endorses this claim, lending religious authority to what becomes the largest Jewish revolt since 66 CE. Bar Kokhba proves a gifted military commander, combining guerrilla tactics with conventional warfare to stunning effect. His forces recapture Jerusalem and establish an independent Jewish state that lasts nearly 3 years. Coins minted with Hebrew inscriptions proclaim, "Year 1 of the redemption of Israel," while Bar Kokhba rules from the holy city as Nasi, or Prince. The rebellion spreads throughout Palestine as Jewish communities welcome their liberating hero. For a brief, shining moment, it seems the ancient prophecies of restoration might be fulfilled. Roman garrisons flee or are overwhelmed, while Jewish exiles return from across the empire to join the cause. The Second Temple's ruins are cleared as preparations begin for its reconstruction. But Emperor Hadrian, builder of the famous wall across Britain, cannot tolerate such defiance. He recalls his best general, Sextus Julius Severus, from the British frontier and assembles a massive army to crush this final Jewish bid for independence. Julius Severus arrives in Judea with 8 legions and auxiliary forces, the largest Roman army ever assembled for a provincial campaign. Learning from earlier mistakes, he avoids pitched battles and instead conducts a methodical campaign of siege and starvation. One by one, Bar Kokhba's strongholds fall to superior Roman engineering and logistics. The rebels retreat to hidden fortresses and cave complexes throughout the Judean wilderness, continuing their resistance even as the noose tightens around them. The final confrontation comes at Bar Kokhba's last major stronghold southwest of Jerusalem. For months, the fortress withstands Roman assault until betrayal or starvation finally opens its gates. Bar Kokhba dies fighting in the ruins of his final redoubt, his messianic dreams crushed beneath Roman boots. The suppression of the Bar Kokhba revolt proves even more devastating than the earlier wars. Hadrian systematically destroys Jewish settlements throughout Palestine, selling survivors into slavery and renaming the province Syria Palestina to erase Jewish connections to the land. Jerusalem becomes Aelia Capitolina, a pagan city forbidden to Jews on pain of death. The Jewish population of Palestine, reduced by war, disease, and deportation, virtually disappears. Rabbi Akiva and other religious leaders are executed with savage cruelty, marking the end of an era in Jewish learning and leadership. The Jewish-Roman Wars conclude with a tragedy that reshapes both Jewish destiny and Roman imperial policy. Over nearly 70 years of conflict, an estimated 1 million Jews died in battle, from starvation, or in the arena. The temple that had stood for 5 centuries lay in ruins, its priestly services ended forever. The survivors scatter to the ends of the earth, beginning a diaspora that will last 18 centuries. In hidden schools and makeshift synagogues, rabbis preserve Hebrew learning and develop new forms of Judaism adapted to life without temple or homeland. The Talmud emerges from this catastrophe, a vast commentary on Jewish law that enables the religion to survive persecution and exile. For Rome, these wars prove that military might alone cannot crush the human spirit or extinguish religious faith. The empire learns to govern through accommodation rather than simple force, though this lesson comes too late for Judea's vanished communities. The empty hills of Palestine stand as mute testimony to a people's desperate struggle for freedom and faith. Yet in synagogues from Spain to India, Jewish voices continue to pray for return to Zion, keeping alive dreams that seemed buried forever beneath Judean stones. Their story reminds us that some battles transcend victory and defeat, echoing through history long after the last sword falls silent. If you like today's story, make sure to check out our other videos on our channel. Have a nice day.